Hi, I'm Melissa Cobb. Come fly with AOPA. Well, how short can you get your short field takeoff? If you're like me, you've probably watched lots of stall demos and analyzed pilots' techniques and tried different techniques yourself. Well, AOPA pilot editor at Large Dave Hirschman took a 185 and tried 4 different techniques to see which was myth and which was fact.
Pilots have a big bag of tricks when it comes to enhancing aircraft performance, things like short field takeoffs, but do any of them really matter? So we're here at Kentmore Air Park on Maryland's Eastern Shore, and we're going to try several different techniques to find out what works and what doesn't in short field takeoffs.
Okay, here we go. Hold the brakes, adding full power. Brake release.
This takeoff is pure vanilla. 10 degrees of flaps and a tail low attitude. Absolutely normal.
Brake release. Now hold the stick aft to keep that tail wheel down.
For this takeoff, we're using 20 degrees of flaps and a 3-point attitude. This takeoff also uses 20 degrees of flaps, but would push the tail up and then rotate. And finally, this takeoff starts with 10 degrees of flaps, jumping to 30 degrees of flaps during the takeoff roll.
And full flaps.
So how did they stack up? The longest takeoff was the pure vanilla 10 degrees of flaps, tail low attitude, just the normal takeoff. The next shortest was the most complicated. It was the one where we started with 10 degrees of flaps, pushed the tail up, and then added 30 degrees of flaps during the takeoff roll. The runner-up, the next to the shortest, was the 20 degrees of flaps with the tail high attitude during the takeoff roll. And for the shortest, it was the easiest. It was the 20 degrees of flaps with a 3-point attitude the whole takeoff roll. So the most surprising aspect here is that the pilot techniques that we all use don't help. They actually hurt. They get in the way. The best result is just a 3-point takeoff with max lift flaps. And everything else we do, whether it's raising the tail, adding flaps on the roll, it just gets in the way.
Hey Dave, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here, Alyssa.
So your video, I actually used the technique that came in number 2, the 20 degrees of flaps with the tail wheel low and then taking off in the 170. And it's pretty short, but next time I go up, I'm going to try the 3-point version of that and see how much shorter I get off. So tell us, does experience level play a factor in maybe what technique pilots would try?
Sure. Experience level and also exactly what you're trying to do. If you're a STOL competitor and you're trying to win a contest, you'll have a different technique than somebody who's just taken off from a short field runway. But the surprising aspect to me was just that the simplest technique was also the most effective, and that is just put lift flaps in and take off in a 3-point attitude. And if you do that, you're going to be at least about as short and maybe shorter than any of the other fancier techniques with none of the downsides.
Okay. Now, for pilots who are watching, if they fly a different kind of tail dragger or if they're in a nose-wheel airplane, how can they go about replicating your test with different takeoff techniques in their airplane?
Well, just the same way that we did, and that is just, go out on a day when the conditions are pretty much not changing, and then, mark your takeoff point and use your different technique. We had no agenda in this. We don't have a point of view. We're just kind of like, citizens of Missouri, where it's show me. Let's just find out. And I mentioned that some of the other techniques have downsides, and a few of them are pretty significant. Like in the 185, for example, the flap handle is located way down on the floor, and so if you decide that you're going to deploy flaps during the takeoff roll, you've got to reach way down to the floor, and my arms aren't that long. I can't look out the windshield and reach down to the floor to raise the flaps at the same time. So at the same moment that the airplane's accelerating and you've got all these different turning tendencies, pilots decide that is the time that they're gonna put their head down in the cockpit to raise the flaps. And it's a significant risk of loss of directional control. So flying is just an elaborate risk reward game. What's the risk of doing something? What's the potential payoff? And to me, the surprising aspect of this little experiment was just that the least risky way to take off also has among the highest rewards. And your results may vary, and your plane may vary, and people want to argue and fight about stuff like this endlessly. And I would just say, hey, try it yourself. Go out and approach it with an open mind and see what you learn. Because we learned something from doing this, and it was fun.
Yeah, you really can't beat getting out there and trying it out for yourself, marking your own numbers, and see what works for you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave.
You're welcome, Melissa. Good talking with you.
All right. Well, speaking about flying and different techniques and bettering your aircraft performance, the Air Race Classic is coming up. So that's an all-women's air race flown during day VFR conditions, but you're not competing necessarily against other competitors. You're competing against your best time. And so this race is going to take off June 20th from North Dakota. It's going to end June 23rd in Florida. If you're interested, you can register before March 31st. We have a link to our article on AOPA.org down in the description below. Well, how many propeller blades can you install on a propeller to increase performance? MT Propeller is testing that. They recently did a first flight test with a Piper Cheyenne 1 with 11 blade propellers. That's right, 11 blades. And what they found was a 15% increase in static thrust over the certified 5-blade propeller version. Well, Black Hawk Aerospace Company, that's an aircraft performance upgrade company, has sold its majority ownership to New State Aviation Holdings. Black Hawk is the prime STC holder for Pratt & Whitney PT6 upgrades for older Pilatus PC-12s and Beechcraft King Airs. So this is going to allow New State Aviation Holdings to offer a broader suite of services to light turbine aircraft owners. The AOPA Foundation's 2022 You Can Fly Challenge surpassed its goal thanks to the generosity of the general aviation community and individual contributors. So we raised more than $5.6 million to keep and get more pilots flying through our 4 key initiatives. So that's the high school aviation STEM curriculum, and then the flight training, flying clubs, and Rusty Pilots initiatives. So more than 3,200 unique donors stepped up to the challenge, and what that allowed us to do is the James C. Ray Foundation released $2.5 million in matching funds. So thank you, everyone, for your generosity and for all you've done to help us continue to grow and ensure the health of general aviation for generations to come. All right, well, let's head out to Arizona, where AOPA content producer Alicia Heron gets her very first hot air balloon flight.
So earlier this year, photographer David Toulis and I headed up to Sedona, Arizona to go on a hot air balloon ride. We did our research, and there are quite a few hot air balloon operators in Sedona. And after we did some more research, we decided to go with Northern Light Balloon. And they're one of 2 operators that can actually fly within the Coconino National Forest, which is the protected area around Sedona that's extremely beautiful. We get to this clearing in this beautiful area in the forest, and some of the other balloons are already there getting set up, and it just looks so beautiful. So it was so exciting to see them lay out the balloons, get the fans going to inflate the envelope, and then to get the burners going to add that heat in. And so finally, the hot air balloon, it's inflated enough, it's sort of rising up, and the ground crew's there. And that's the other thing, is that this whole process takes such a team. We have our ground crew helping get everything set up. They're helping keep us on the ground. They're making sure that the balloon's set up properly. And then we all climb into the basket. All of a sudden, we're just in the air and sort of flying away. And it was so magical because where we had launched from was sort of this area that to the north there was sort of a small cliff face. And so it was sort of protected and we couldn't really see out from there. And so as we fly away, we suddenly just get this whole amazing view of the Sedona area with the sun rising and just these beautiful, dramatic red rocks all around us and just this quiet peacefulness. So for the landing, you get to a certain point in your fuel and the pilot decides, it's time to land. And what happens is the hot air balloon needs fuel and heat to keep flying. So as the pilot decides, this is where we're landing, you judge it as you judge what I suspect is just like gliding down in an airplane, and you just don't add more fuel to the fire, and you descend to the point that you want to. And as we got to that point, the ground crew came out and sort of stabilized the basket, and then others helped deflate the balloon. We land, we're just all on this high of this wonderful experience, and they tell us this tradition that they have where you end the flight with a glass of champagne. So back in the day, the history that we have of hot air ballooning, as far as we know, is they would fly around, inevitably land in some farmer's field, and then have to beg forgiveness with what they found to be quite helpful was a bottle of champagne. So it was really fun to be able to experience that and be part of that and think back to hundreds of years ago when this was just enchanting the world and letting people dream of bigger things.
And breakfast is served.
Well, I've got to say, hot air balloon flying has been the most peaceful kind of flying I've ever experienced, probably followed by glider flying and then seaplane flying third. So what's the most peaceful flying you've ever experienced? Just drop us a note in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you have to say. I hope that you've enjoyed this week's episode of Fly with AOPA. Be sure to like and subscribe so you stay up to date on all our latest aviation videos. And this week, we leave you with footage from viewer Jose Gilbert flying a Mooney down to Gainesville, Florida. Be sure to send in your favorite flying videos. You just might see them in an upcoming show. We'll have the link for you down in the description below. And as always, if you're not already an AOPA pilot, we'd love for you to join us. Just click the link at the end of the video to learn more.